The scent of funeral lilies still filled the house when Victoria cornered me in Robert's study. The room was lined with everything we had built over 43 years. Photos, books, the leather chair where he used to read every night. Victoria crossed her arms, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "Let's be honest, Helen," she said, tapping Robert's desk. "You're 64. What exactly would you do with $53 million? My son Marcus stood silently behind her, arms folded, eyes fixed on the floor. The same boy I once cradled through fevers now looked at me like a business problem to solve. "This is my home," I whispered, clutching Robert's chair. "Robert and I built this life together." Victoria let out a sharp laugh. "Built what? Robert built an empire. You just kept house. You still balance your checkbook by hand. How will you manage that kind of money?" Her words struck deep, because they weren't entirely wrong. Robert had always handled the finances. He wanted me to focus on family. Back then, it felt natural. Now, it felt like a trap. "The lawyers are expecting us Thursday morning," Marcus finally said. "We've drafted the papers. Once you sign over your inheritance rights, we'll make sure you're comfortable in a nice retirement community." "A retirement community?" My knees weakened. I sank into Robert's chair. "Don't get dramatic," Victoria said lightly. "Sunny Hills is lovely. They have bingo on Wednesdays." Her tone was sweet and cruel. "You'll have everything you need. Medical care, companionship, people your own age." "Robert left me this house," I said, though my voice trembled. Had he? In those final, chaotic days of hospital visits and medications, I hadn't thought about wills. Victoria exchanged a quick look with Marcus, and I saw something cold in her eyes. "Mother," Marcus said in that formal voice he'd used ever since he married her. Dad wasn't thinking clearly near the end. Medication, stress. He made questionable choices. Questionable? I stood so fast the chair spun behind me. "Your father's mind was sharp until his last breath." "Was it?" Victoria asked, scrolling on her phone. "I have recordings of him calling me Margaret last month. That was his first wife's name, wasn't it? The one who passed long before he met you?" The room swayed. Yes, Robert had been confused that day, but the doctor said it was because of the pain medication. Victoria's voice softened into false sympathy. "He also asked me how old his grandson was. Marcus and I have been married 8 years, Helen. We don't have children." I felt like I was sinking. "Mom," Marcus interrupted, "he even forgot your anniversary last year. He didn't know why there were flowers in the house." "That's not true," I said quickly. Robert had remembered. He'd given me these very pearl earrings. My fingers brushed them as if to prove it. Victoria stepped closer. "We're not trying to hurt you. We're protecting you, and Robert's legacy. You don't want people thinking he left everything to be squandered, do you?" "I'm not helpless," I said, my voice shaking. "You're not young either," she replied softly. "Be practical, Helen. This house is 6,000 square feet. You'd be lost in it alone, and the moment word gets out that you're a wealthy widow, people will come to take advantage." Her words painted a frightening picture. Me, alone in this empty mansion, slowly drained by strangers. Maybe. She was right. Maybe I was naive. "The papers are simple," Marcus said, opening a folder from Robert's desk. "You sign, transfer your inheritance to us, and we'll take care of everything. You'll have a generous allowance and full coverage for life. We'll visit often." "Visit?" I repeated, staring at the man who used to run into my arms after school. When had his eyes turned so cold? "Marcus," I said softly, "this is my home. Your father and I—" "Were what?" Victoria cut in sharply. "Playing house?" The air froze. "Let's not pretend this was some grand love story, Helen," Victoria said coldly. "You were Robert's second wife, his consolation after Margaret passed." The cruelty of it hit me like a slap. "That's not true," I whispered. "Isn't it?" She pressed. "You were 21. He was 45, a widower with a baby. You were the nanny, convenient, familiar." Each word was a knife, sharp and deliberate, and though twisted, there was truth buried in them. Yes, I had been young. Yes, I'd been Marcus's nanny. But Robert had loved me. He had chosen me. He built a life with me. "Sign the papers, Helen," Victoria said, her voice returning to that syrupy sweetness that hid steel underneath. "Stop making this harder than it needs to be. We're family. We're helping you." I looked down at the documents Marcus was holding out. The dense legal language blurred before my eyes, but the meaning was crystal clear. They wanted me gone, quietly erased from the picture, while they collected everything Robert had left behind. "I need time to think," I said at last. Victoria's smile didn't falter, but her eyes turned dangerous. "Of course you do," she said softly. "But don't take too long, dear. Places at Sunny Hills don't stay open forever." The threat hid just beneath her polished tone. When they finally left the study, I stayed there in Robert's chair, surrounded by his books and photographs, our life together frozen in frames. Every picture showed us smiling. Had I been fooling myself for 43 years? My hands shook as I reached for the phone to call our lawyer. Then froze. Did I even know his number? Robert had handled all of that. Maybe Victoria was right. Maybe I had been sheltered from the real world for too long. But something in my chest wouldn't settle. She'd been too ready. The documents, the rehearsed cruelty, the timing. How long had they been planning this? That night, the house felt colder, like it already belonged to someone else. Yet deep down I couldn't believe Robert would have left me unprotected. He was meticulous. There had to be something I was missing. 3 nights later, 3:00 a.m. Sleep wouldn't come. I found myself standing in our bedroom, the one that now felt far too large. The electric blanket hummed, but the emptiness beside me was unbearable. I'd been sorting through Robert's belongings, anything to stay busy, to avoid thinking about those papers. When I opened his nightstand drawer, my hand brushed against something unexpected, a small digital recorder, the kind he used years ago for business notes. I pressed play, and then I heard his voice. Weakened, yes, but steady. "Helen, if you're hearing this, it means I'm gone, and they've started their games." The air left my lungs. "I've been watching them, sweetheart, Marcus and Victoria. I know what they're planning, and I've taken steps to protect you. Don't sign anything. Whatever they tell you about me being confused or forgetful, don't believe them." My heartbeat roared in my ears. Robert had known. "Check behind my books on the 3rd shelf, the Hemingway collection. You'll find what you need there." My hands trembled as I rushed to his study. I pulled the Hemingway books aside, and there it was, a thick manila folder. Inside, documents, bank statements, photographs, printed emails. I spread them across his desk. The truth formed before my eyes. Bank transfers from Robert's personal account to Marcus's company, small amounts, spread over 2 years. 50,000 here, 30 there, nearly $500,000 in total, all marked as personal loans. None repaid. And then the emails. From Marcus to Victoria, 6 months ago. "The old man's getting suspicious. We need to speed up the timeline." Her reply, "I'm working on isolating him from Helen. Already convinced him she's been spending too much. He's questioning her charges." My breath caught. That Nordstrom charge. The one Robert had accused me of last spring, $800 I didn't recognize. I had dismissed it as a mistake. But now I understood. They hadn't just plotted to take his fortune, they had turned him against me, one lie at a time. I'd thought that charge was a simple mistake. I even meant to call the bank. But then Robert's health declined, and everything else faded into the background. Now, reading Victoria's emails, the truth hit me like ice water. Used Helen's card number for my shopping trip. Robert's already suspicious. Perfect timing. The methodical cruelty of it took my breath away. They'd been setting me up, making me look careless with money, while secretly draining Robert's accounts. Next, I found photographs. Pictures taken from a distance, through a telephoto lens, me having lunch at the country club with my friend Dorothy. Attached to each photo was a note in Victoria's handwriting, "Helen with male companion." 2:30 p.m. Tuesday. Seemed very intimate. The so-called male companion was Dorothy's 70-year-old brother visiting from Phoenix. We'd talked about his grandchildren over soup and salad. Innocent. But Victoria had twisted it into something scandalous. More emails revealed the full picture. A plan so cold and deliberate it made my hands shake. They had been working for months to convince Robert that I was unfaithful, reckless with money, and showing signs of memory loss. Victoria had even researched early dementia symptoms, just to plant doubts in Robert's mind. Marcus to Victoria. Keep pushing the angle about her memory. Ask her about conversations that never happened. When she gets confused, point it out to Dad. Suddenly, I remembered all those times Victoria had asked me about things I supposedly said or promised, events that never existed. When I couldn't recall them, she'd sigh sympathetically and suggest I see a doctor. But the worst discovery came next. An email thread, their plan for after Robert's passing. Victoria to Marcus. Sunny Hills costs $3,200 a month. If we can have Helen declared unfit to manage her affairs, we'll be her guardians. She'll never touch the inheritance. We can sell the house immediately. Marcus. Perfect. She's already isolated from her friends. No one will question it. I had to run to the bathroom. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated that my body couldn't even process it. They hadn't just planned to take my money. They had planned to have me legally declared incapable, locked away in a care facility, while they spent everything Robert had built. When I came back to the study, I found more. Emails between Victoria and someone named Dr. Reginald Hartwell, a psychiatrist who specialized in elder evaluations. Victoria. We'll need an official statement confirming Mrs. Thornton is no longer capable of managing her finances. She's been showing confusion. Dr. Hartwell. I'll need examples of these behaviors. Victoria. Of course. We've been keeping detailed records. Her records were nothing but fiction, carefully crafted lies. Moments she had created herself, giving me wrong appointment times, switching dates, asking me about imaginary events, then writing notes about my confusion. Page after page painted a portrait of a woman slowly losing her mind. If I hadn't found these files, I would have walked into that evaluation completely unaware. Dr. Hartwell would have signed a report based entirely on Victoria's deception. I sat there in Robert's chair, surrounded by proof of what my own son and daughter-in-law had done, and felt something new. Not fear, not grief, but a cold, clear rage. They had tried to destroy my reputation, my marriage, my future, but Robert had known. That recorder wasn't just a warning, it was proof he'd seen through them, and if he had hidden that, maybe there was more. Fueled by that thought, I searched through his belongings, driven now not by sadness but by determination. In his closet, behind winter coats that still smelled faintly of his cologne, I found a small safe I'd never seen before. The combination? Our wedding date. Inside was a sealed letter addressed to me, in Robert's handwriting. Beside it were 3 business cards for attorneys I'd never heard of, all specialists in inheritance protection and elder law. I unfolded the letter. My dearest Helen, if you're reading this, you've found the evidence of their betrayal. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from the pain of discovering it, but I couldn't act without proof. I've been gathering information for months, and I've taken steps to ensure they can never harm you. Robert explained that he'd known about their manipulation for nearly a year. He had hired a private investigator, changed his will quietly, and set up legal safeguards Marcus and Victoria didn't even know existed. They think I was confused during my last months, he wrote. I let them believe it. It was easier to catch their lies when they thought I wasn't paying attention. Tears blurred the ink as I read the final line, the one that changed everything. Don't sign anything until you meet with my attorney. James Morrison knows everything. Trust him, and trust the plan we made together. Those were Robert's final words in the letter. I looked down at the business card. James Morrison, attorney at law. His office was across town, nowhere near the firm Marcus had mentioned. This wasn't the family lawyer. This was Robert's secret ally. The man who knew the truth about everything. For the first time since Robert's passing, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. My husband hadn't left me defenseless. He'd seen the storm coming and built a shelter I hadn't known existed. Victoria and Marcus thought they were dealing with a naive widow, broken by grief. They had no idea Robert had been several moves ahead of them all along. I held his letter to my chest and smiled, for the first time in weeks. They had underestimated both of us. Now it was time to find out just how far Robert's plan went. James Morrison's office wasn't what I'd imagined. No marble floors, no gold nameplates, just a modest downtown building with soft lighting and the scent of coffee. The waiting room walls were covered in photographs of smiling elderly clients, framed thank you notes, and certificates from organizations that protected seniors from financial exploitation. This wasn't a law firm. It was a refuge. When the receptionist showed me in, James Morrison stood to greet me. He was younger than I expected, maybe 50, with kind eyes behind thin, wire-rimmed glasses. "Mrs. Thornton," he said warmly. "I've been expecting you. Robert told me you'd come when the time was right." "He told you I'd find my way here?" James smiled gently. "He told me many things. Your husband was a very thorough man, and deeply protective of the people he loved." I sat down across from him, clutching my purse, the letter inside like a heartbeat against my side. "How long have you known about Marcus and Victoria?" I asked. "Robert first contacted me 8 months ago," James said, opening a large folder labeled Thornton Estate, confidential. "He suspected something was wrong but didn't have proof. So we built a case together." He placed the thick file on the desk. "Your husband was much sharper than his son ever realized." The word son carried an edge. James had seen the evidence, too. "Robert hired a private investigator," he continued, "a former FBI agent named Sarah Chen. She documented everything, the stolen funds, the manipulation, even the plan to have you declared unfit to handle your own affairs." He handed me a photograph. My breath caught. Victoria and Marcus, laughing at an upscale restaurant, champagne glasses raised. The timestamp showed the day after Robert's diagnosis, the day they were supposed to be devastated. "Sarah recorded their conversations," James said quietly. "Would you like to hear what they really thought?" I nodded, though part of me didn't want to know. James pressed play on a small recorder. Victoria's voice came through, cold and crystal clear. "Finally! I was wondering how long we'd have to wait for the old man to go." Marcus's voice followed. "The timing's perfect. Helen's already emotional. We can use that. If she gets suspicious—" "She won't," Victoria interrupted. "She's depended on him for everything. She has no idea how to survive in the real world." The sound of my son's voice made my stomach twist. I closed my eyes, but James's calm tone brought me back. "There's more, Mrs. Thornton," he said softly. He pressed play again. "The key," Victoria said on the recording, "is to isolate her, make her question her own memory. Once she starts doubting herself, the rest will be easy." Marcus: "And if she resists?" Victoria: "We'll convince everyone she's confused. Once she's in a care home, we'll handle the finances. She'll even thank us for taking care of everything." My hands clenched into fists. Then Marcus's voice again, colder this time. "What about Dad's will?" "If we have to," Victoria said, "we'll contest it, claim he wasn't thinking clearly, and once Helen's declared incompetent too, we'll be the only heirs left." But then Marcus said something that turned my blood to ice. "What if he changes the will? He's been asking questions about our business lately." Victoria laughed. "Let him, a confused old man making last-minute changes? Any court would see that as proof he wasn't in his right mind. We're safe either way." James stopped the recording. Silence filled the room. "They underestimated your husband," he said. "Robert wasn't confused, he was acting. It was the only way to collect evidence without raising suspicion." I stared at him. "He pretended?" James nodded. "He let them believe they were manipulating him, while he was recording every move they made." He opened another folder. Inside were photographs, bank statements, transcripts of conversations, the proof Robert had gathered piece by piece. "Your husband built this case with precision," James said. "He knew when the time came, you'd need undeniable evidence." "What kind of evidence?" I asked. James leaned forward. Everything. Video of them discussing their plans, bank records showing Marcus's unauthorized withdrawals, documentation of Victoria's misuse of your cards, and, most importantly, signed papers proving their intent to have you declared unfit to inherit. My throat tightened. So, Robert knew. He really knew. Yes, James said softly, and he made sure the truth couldn't be buried, no matter what they did next. I stared at the mountain of evidence spread across James's desk. How did Robert gather all this without them ever noticing? I asked. James smiled faintly. Your husband was more tech-savvy than he let on. He installed hidden cameras in his study, recorded his phone calls, and even wore a small recorder during some of their visits. Sarah Chen helped him set it all up. The picture grew sharper with every word. All those times Robert had seemed to drift off during Marcus and Victoria's visits. He hadn't been sleeping at all. He'd been listening and recording. When he asked them to repeat things because he couldn't hear well, he was making sure every word was captured. James leaned back. Even the confusion from his medication, that was part of the act. Robert was perfectly lucid, but he let them think the drugs were clouding his mind. They revealed more when they believed he wasn't truly following. I thought back to those final weeks, to the vacant stares, the repeated questions, the quiet pauses that had broken my heart. He hadn't been fading. He'd been performing. He protected you the only way he could, James said softly, by letting them think they'd already won. I swallowed hard. What about the will? That was when James's expression turned serious. That, he said, is where your husband's plan becomes truly brilliant. He opened another folder. Robert created several versions of his will over the past year. The one Marcus and Victoria know about, the one they're expecting, leaves most of the estate to them, with provisions for your care at Sunny Hills. My stomach sank. So they were right after all? James shook his head firmly. No, that will was a decoy. Robert wanted them to find it. He left drafts where they could easily, accidentally discover them. It made them overconfident. A decoy, I whispered. The real will, James said, pulling out a notarized document bearing Robert's signature, was signed just 6 weeks before he passed. It includes a special clause. Any family member who engages in manipulation, financial exploitation, or attempts to influence the testator's mental state forfeits their inheritance. He slid the papers toward me. Marcus and Victoria violated every condition. They've disqualified themselves completely. I stared at him, barely breathing. What does that mean? It means, James said simply, you inherit everything. The house, the investments, the business interests, all $53 million. Marcus and Victoria receive nothing. The room seemed to tilt. Nothing? James's eyes glinted. Well, not quite nothing. Robert left them each $1, and a personal letter explaining exactly why. He handed me a separate envelope. Robert's handwriting was unmistakable, steady even through my tears. To my son Marcus and his wife Victoria, you have shown me that family means nothing without kindness and respect. Your greed and cruelty toward my beloved Helen have earned you this inheritance. The knowledge that your own actions have cost you everything. I could barely breathe. When will they find out? Tomorrow, James said, at the official will reading. They'll walk in expecting to be named as primary beneficiaries. Instead, he smiled faintly. They'll learn the truth. I pictured Victoria's smug confidence, Marcus's cold composure. They had no idea what was waiting for them. There's one more thing, James added. Robert built a final safeguard. If they try to contest the will or harass you in any way, all the evidence of their financial crimes goes straight to the district attorney. Sarah Chen already has the complaint ready. Criminal complaint? I echoed. Marcus embezzled nearly $500,000. Victoria committed card fraud and conspiracy to manipulate an elder. Robert documented everything. He wanted them to have a choice, accept the outcome quietly or face prosecution. I sat in silence, the full weight of Robert's plan settling over me. He hadn't just protected me. He had built justice into every step. "Why didn't he tell me?" I asked finally. James's expression softened. "Because he knew you loved your son. He was afraid you might try to stop him, or worse, warn them. He wanted you safe, even if it meant keeping secrets." "I do love him," I whispered, "despite everything." "Robert knew that," James said gently. "That's why he gave them every chance to change, right up until the end. But they didn't. They doubled down on their cruelty, certain your husband was too confused to fight back." James closed the file and looked up at me. "Tomorrow's reading is at 10 a.m. Are you ready for this?" I glanced down at the documents, proof of Robert's love, his foresight, his final battle for me. He'd spent his last months not just fighting illness, but protecting my future. He'd outsmarted two people who thought they'd already won. A calm strength filled me. "Yes," I said. "I'm ready." As I left James Morrison's office, I realized that tomorrow wouldn't just be a will reading. It would be the moment the truth finally came to light. It would be the moment when Marcus and Victoria finally discovered that they'd been playing a game they'd already lost, against an opponent they never truly understood. The conference room at Morrison Associates felt more like a courtroom. I sat across from them in a leather chair, hands folded neatly in my lap, the very image of the fragile widow they believed me to be. At the head of the polished table sat James Morrison, calm and composed, Robert's will sealed inside a manila folder. Victoria had come dressed for victory. Her tailored black Chanel suit and diamond earrings practically shouted confidence. She scrolled on her phone like this was just another meeting in her busy life. Marcus wore the dark suit Robert had given him last Christmas, back when we still believed he was a loving son. "Thank you all for coming," James began formally. "We're here for the reading of Robert Thornton's last will and testament, executed on February 15th of this year." Victoria looked up sharply. "February? That's only 6 weeks before he died. Was he even mentally competent to make changes that close to the end?" James's tone stayed even. "Mr. Thornton was examined by 2 independent physicians prior to signing. Both confirmed he was of sound mind." Marcus leaned forward, tension in his jaw. "What kind of changes are we talking about?" "All will be revealed in due course," James replied. "The will requires that it be read in full before questions are taken." He opened the folder, his hands steady. Mine were trembling slightly, so I clasped them tighter. "I, Robert Thornton, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils." Victoria smiled faintly. She still thought she knew exactly what was coming. "First, to my beloved wife, Helen Thornton, who has been my companion, my comfort, and my greatest joy for 43 years of marriage." Even in that sterile room, Robert's words felt alive. My throat tightened. "To Helen, I leave my personal effects, including jewelry, photographs, and items of sentimental value. I also leave her our home at 1247 Maple Ridge Drive, along with all furnishings and contents." Marcus nodded slightly. This was what they expected. House and memories for me, money for them. "Additionally," James continued, "I leave to Helen the sum of $500,000 for her immediate comfort." Victoria's eyes flickered. That was more than she'd planned, but not enough to unsettle her confidence. Then James turned the page. "Now to my son, Marcus Thornton." Marcus straightened in his chair, already smiling. "I leave the sum of $1. The room went silent. The words hung in the air like thunder. Marcus blinked, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?" James didn't flinch. $1. Victoria's head snapped up. "That's absurd. There must be a mistake." James ignored her. "To Victoria Thornton, wife of my son, I also leave the sum of $1. Victoria shot to her feet. "This is ridiculous. Robert wasn't thinking clearly. No sane father does this. This will is invalid." "Please sit down, Mrs. Thornton," James said evenly. There's more. Marcus sank back into his chair, color draining from his face. The remainder of my estate, James read, including all bank accounts, investments, business holdings, and real property not otherwise specified, totaling approximately $52.5 million. He looked up. I leave entirely to my wife, Helen Thornton. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the faint traffic outside, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. This is impossible, Victoria whispered. James lifted another page. There's an accompanying letter your father requested be read aloud. He looked directly at Marcus and Victoria. To my son Marcus and his wife, Victoria, for the past year I have watched you manipulate, deceive, and plan to betray the woman I love most in this world. I have documented your theft of nearly $500,000, your discussions about declaring Helen incompetent, and your attempts to isolate her from those who care for her. You believed I was too confused to see what you were doing. You were wrong. Every cruel word, every scheme, every lie, you were never alone. I was watching, listening, and recording. Victoria's perfect composure shattered. You can't do this. We're family. We took care of him. I finally spoke, my voice calm and clear. You took care of yourselves. Victoria spun toward me, eyes blazing. You don't understand. You can't even manage that kind of money. It should go to people who can actually use it. I tilted my head slightly. You mean like Marcus, who used it to fund his failed business ventures? Marcus's face went white. You have no proof of that. James calmly slid a folder across the table. Actually, we do. He opened it, revealing pages of signed bank records and screenshots of transactions. These documents, along with recorded conversations, will remain sealed unless either of you chooses to contest the will or interfere with Mrs. Thornton in any way. Marcus's jaw tightened. Victoria sank back into her chair, silent now, the color gone from her face. For the first time in months, I felt peace. Robert had planned everything, every move, every word, every trap. I looked at them both and said quietly, Robert always taught me never underestimate the quiet ones. James closed the folder. That concludes the reading. Marcus slammed his hand against the table. That wasn't stealing. Dad knew I needed help with the company. James didn't even flinch. Did he also know you forged his signature on the transfer authorizations? He asked calmly. Because we have handwriting analysis confirming that you did. Marcus froze. This is a setup. Victoria's voice rose, sharp and brittle. Helen manipulated a sick old man into changing his will. She's the one who should be investigated. James opened another folder with measured precision. Actually, Mrs. Thornton, your father-in-law anticipated that argument. He placed a photograph on the table. It showed Victoria and Marcus in a real estate office, clearly visible through the window-shaking hands with an agent. This was taken 3 weeks before your father-in-law's passing, James said evenly. You were already shopping for investment properties with money you hadn't inherited yet. Victoria snatched the photo. This proves nothing. It proves you were so confident about inheriting that you were already spending the money, James replied. The agent is ready to testify that you put down a deposit on a $2 million property, claiming you'd have full payment within the month. Marcus looked sick. We were planning ahead. That's not illegal. No, James said, his tone still calm. But embezzlement is. Credit card fraud is. Conspiracy to exploit an elder is. He pulled out another document, sliding it across the table. Your father included very specific instructions for what would happen if either of you contested the will or attempted to harass Helen in any way. Victoria's voice shook. What kind of instructions? James looked at her directly. All evidence of your crimes will be turned over to the district attorney. The complaints are already prepared. The complaints? Marcus repeated weakly. Yes, James said. Filed by Sarah Chen, the private investigator your father hired. You actually met her, Mrs. Thornton. You knew her as Robert's home health aide. Victoria's eyes widened. Her? I remembered the quiet, kind woman who'd cared for Robert with such gentleness. I'd trusted her instantly. Now I understood why. She wasn't just caring for him, she was helping him protect me. "This is extortion," Marcus muttered. "No," James said softly. "This is justice. Your father has given you a choice. Accept your $1 inheritance quietly and never contact Helen again, or contest the will and face full criminal prosecution." Victoria's breath came fast and shallow. "We have rights. We have legal rights." "You forfeited your rights when you chose to steal and deceive," I said, rising from my chair. For the first time in months, my voice was steady. "Robert loved you, Marcus. Even at the end, he hoped you'd change. But you didn't." "Mom, please," Marcus said, and for a fleeting moment, he sounded like the little boy I used to tuck in at night. "We can fix this. Family shouldn't fight like this." "You're right," I said softly. "Family shouldn't fight. But family also shouldn't steal. Family shouldn't try to have their mother declared incompetent, and family definitely shouldn't celebrate their father's illness as a business opportunity." Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. "Fine. You want to play this game? We'll contest everything. We'll drag this through court for years." James reached for his phone. "Should I call District Attorney Williams now? Or would you prefer to make that call yourself when you're arrested?" Victoria's eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing." James pressed a button on his phone. "Sarah, could you bring in the evidence boxes, please? Mrs. Victoria Thornton would like to see what we'll be presenting." A moment later, the door opened, and there she was. Sarah Chen. Calm. Unshakable. She wheeled in a cart stacked with file boxes. "Hello again, Mrs. Thornton," she said gently to me. "Your husband was very proud of you. He said you'd handle this with more grace than they deserved." Victoria stared at the box's months of proof, recorded conversations, forged signatures, bank statements. The color drained from her face as the weight of it all finally hit her. "How long do we have to decide?" Marcus asked quietly. "The reading is concluded," James said. "You have 24 hours to accept the terms or face prosecution." Victoria grabbed her purse, her voice shaking. "This isn't over." But the threat sounded hollow. Marcus lingered. His expression was a mix of guilt and something that might have been regret. "Mom, You made your choice," I said quietly. "You made it months ago." He nodded slowly, then turned to follow Victoria out of the room. As the door closed behind them, the weight of it all finally settled. My knees felt weak. I sank into my chair, letting the silence fill the space they'd left behind. James and Sarah began organizing the documents, giving me time to breathe. "Mrs. Thornton," James said gently, "are you all right?" I looked at him. This young lawyer who had helped my husband orchestrate the most intricate act of love I had ever witnessed. Tears blurred my vision, but I smiled. "Yes," I said softly. "I think I finally am." I said slowly, "I'm better than all right. For the first time in months. I think I'm free." When I walked out of that conference room, I realized Robert had left me far more than financial security. He'd left me proof that I was worth protecting, worth fighting for. Tomorrow would be the first day of the rest of my life, and for the first time in years, that life would belong entirely to me. 22 hours after the will reading, my phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. For a moment I thought of ignoring it, but something in me, something that still needed to understand, made me answer. "Mom." His voice was small, uncertain. "Can we talk? Victoria and we'd like to come over." "To my house?" I asked. "The same house where they'd once tried to strip me of everything?" "Please, we just want to discuss things." I hesitated, looking around the living room where Victoria had once called me too old to handle money, the same room where Marcus had handed me papers meant to erase my life. "1 hour," I said, "and Marcus, don't bring any papers for me to sign." When they arrived, the change in them was startling. Victoria's usual designer confidence was gone. She looked older, her perfect makeup unable to hide the exhaustion etched into her face. Marcus couldn't meet my eyes. They sat uneasily on the same couch where they'd once gloated about their future. "We've been thinking about what the lawyer said," Victoria began, her tone stripped of arrogance, "about the charges." I stayed silent, waiting. Marcus finally looked up. "How long did Dad know? About everything?" "Long enough to protect me from you," I said. My voice was steady, though seeing my son defeated cut deep. "He hired investigators. He recorded your conversations. He knew about the stolen money, the forged signatures, and the plan to have me declared unfit." Victoria flinched. "We never actually went through with that." "Only because Robert died before you could," I said quietly. I pulled out copies of the emails James had given me. "You'd already contacted Dr. Hartwell. You'd already researched facilities. You'd already decided my fate." "That was just contingency planning," Marcus murmured weakly. "Contingency planning." My voice rose before I could stop it. "You planned to steal my inheritance, cut me off from my friends, and lock me away in a care home. Tell me, what part of that sounds like love to you?" Silence filled the room. Victoria stared at her hands. Marcus said nothing. "Your father left you each $1, I said, "but he also left you a choice. Accept it and walk away, or face criminal charges for everything you've done." Victoria swallowed. "The theft charges. How serious are they?" "Serious enough that you could both go to prison," I said, my voice calm now. "Marcus embezzled nearly $500,000. You used stolen credit cards and plotted against a terminally ill man. Don't ask me to feel sorry for you." Marcus buried his face in his hands. "I never meant for it to go that far." "When did you plan to stop?" I asked softly. "After I was locked away? After you spent every dollar Robert left behind? After I died alone somewhere while you lived comfortably off his money?" Victoria whispered, "We would have visited." Then she heard herself and went silent. "Visited?" I repeated. "Like you did after your father's funeral?" I turned toward the window, needing space. "You celebrated his death, Victoria. I heard the recordings. You toasted with champagne while I was still mourning." "We were relieved," she said quietly. "He'd been sick for so long. He was sick for 3 months. You were relieved because you thought you were finally free of consequences." The room grew heavy with the truth. These were people I had loved, trusted, and welcomed into my life, and they had seen me as nothing more than an obstacle to their greed. "What do you want from us?" Marcus asked finally. "I want you to leave my house," I said, "and never contact me again." "That's it?" Victoria blinked. "You're not pressing charges?" "That depends entirely on you," I replied, sitting down again but keeping my distance. "Your father gave you a way out. Take your $1 inheritance, disappear quietly, and this ends today." Marcus hesitated. "What about Dad's company? The construction business? I've been running it for 5 years." "You've been running it into the ground for 5 years," I said. "I'd done my homework since the will reading. The company Robert built is now worth exactly what you're inheriting from his estate, $1. Marcus's face crumpled. "I tried to make it work. The economy, the competition." "You used it as your personal bank account," I cut in. "Every time the company made a profit, you drained it for your vacations and luxuries." Victoria shifted uncomfortably. She'd been part of those luxuries. "Here's what's going to happen," I said firmly. "You'll sign over any remaining business assets to settle the debts. You'll return the credit cards you used illegally, and then you'll both leave my life for good." Victoria's voice cracked. "What about our house? The mortgage depends on Marcus's job." I met her gaze. "You should have thought of that before you decided to steal from his dying father." They left without another word. When the door closed, the silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was peace. For the first time in years, my home felt like mine again. Quiet, warm, untouched by lies. Robert's photograph sat on the mantel, his gentle smile catching the afternoon light. "You did it, my love," I whispered. "We did it." Tomorrow I would start over, not as someone's wife or someone's mother, but as myself. And for the first time, that was enough. I feel no sympathy for your financial troubles, I said firmly. You're both young enough to start over, get jobs, build something honest for once. Marcus looked around the living room, the family photos on the mantel, the furniture Robert and I had picked together, the life he had tried to take from me. I'm sorry, Mom, he said finally, and for the first time since they'd walked in, his voice sounded real. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am sorry. For which part? I asked quietly. For stealing from your father? For planning to have me declared unfit? For celebrating his death? Or just for getting caught? He didn't answer. That silence was all the answer I needed. Victoria stood abruptly. We need to discuss this privately. It's a big decision. No, I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. There's nothing left to discuss. You have until tomorrow morning to inform James Morrison of your decision. Accept the terms or face the charges. Victoria's mask cracked, the venom finally showing. You're really going to destroy your own son? What would Robert think about you sending Marcus to prison? Robert, I said, standing now, is the one who built the case against him. Even while he was dying, he was still a better father than either of you deserved. He wasn't my husband, Victoria snapped. He was my father-in-law, a controlling old man who couldn't stand anyone else influencing his precious son. And there it was, the truth I'd suspected all along. Victoria hadn't just hated me, she'd hated Robert too. His integrity, his influence, his strength. To her, his death had been freedom. Get out, I said quietly. Helen, Marcus began, get out. You've made your choices, now make them somewhere else. Victoria's heels clicked sharply against the floor as she stormed out. Marcus followed, a shadow of the man Robert had raised. When the door closed behind them, I sat down in Robert's favorite chair, the same chair where he'd read to me at night, where he'd built his plans to protect me. I reached into my bag and pulled out the letter James had given me after the will reading, the one Robert had asked him to give me privately. My dearest Helen, if you're reading this, it means you stood your ground and sent them away. I'm proud of you, even if I'm not there to say it in person. I know discovering Marcus's betrayal must have broken your heart. It broke mine too. But some people choose their path, Helen. Marcus chose greed over love, deception over honesty. That wasn't our failure, it was his. Don't waste your peace wondering what we could have done differently. You did everything right. You were a good mother. You gave him love and stability. The choices he made after that were his own. I've made arrangements for you, new accounts, trusted advisors, and people who will help you live comfortably and freely. Use what I've left you to find joy again. Travel, laugh, fill this house with light. Don't let their betrayal harden your heart. You have decades ahead of you, and you deserve to spend them surrounded by people who value your kindness, your intelligence, and your beautiful heart. You were never too old to deserve love, respect, and safety. Never let anyone, not even our son, convince you otherwise. You are worth protecting, worth cherishing, and worth fighting for. I hope my final act as your husband proved that to you. When I finished reading, tears blurred the words. Robert had done more than secure my future. He'd given me something deeper, validation, dignity, proof that I had always been worth the effort, worth the plan, worth the fight. The phone rang again, pulling me back to the present. Mrs. Thornton, James Morrison's voice said gently, I thought you should know. Marcus and Victoria just called. They've accepted the terms of the will. No contest, no contact, and they'll return all property belonging to the estate. A weight I hadn't realized I was carrying lifted from my shoulders. Thank you, James. There's one more thing, he added. Sarah Chen asked me to give you a message from your husband. He wanted you to know he'd hidden something special for you, something you'd find when you were ready. Check under the Persian rug in his study, the loose floorboard. Scene, the hidden letters. After hanging up, I went to Robert's study. The late afternoon sun spilled across his desk as I moved the heavy rug aside. Just as James had said, one of the floorboards was loose. Beneath it, wrapped carefully in waterproof plastic, was a small wooden box. Inside, letters, dozens of them, all addressed to me in Robert's handwriting, each one dated during his illness. I opened the first. My darling Helen, I'm not afraid of dying. I'm only afraid of leaving you vulnerable to people who might hurt you. I promise. I'll find a way to protect you, even after I'm gone. The ink was faded, the handwriting shaky, but the love behind it was as steady as ever. I pressed the letter to my heart. Robert had done it. He'd kept his promise. Epilogue. Freedom and love. That night, I sat by the fireplace, surrounded by his letters. For the first time in months, the house felt warm again, not haunted by betrayal, but filled with peace. Robert's love hadn't just saved me from them, it had given me back myself. Tomorrow I would begin the next chapter, and this time it would be mine alone. Each letter told a story. Robert's growing awareness of Marcus and Victoria's betrayal, the heartbreak of realizing who they truly were, and his unwavering determination to protect me. But beyond the pain, the letters were filled with love. Memories of the life we'd built, small moments I'd forgotten, words of gratitude for our 43 years together. The final letter was written just days before he passed. Helen, my time is almost gone, but my love for you will outlast anything Marcus and Victoria ever tried to take from us. You gave me the best years of my life. Now let me give you the freedom to enjoy whatever years you have left. Sitting there, surrounded by his final words, I understood something profound. Tomorrow wouldn't just mark the beginning of my financial independence. It would mark the beginning of my life, one where I would never again question my worth or tolerate anyone's cruelty. Robert had made sure of that. Scene. 6 months later. 6 months after the will reading, I stood in the garden of my new home, watching the sunrise turn the mountains gold and pink. The house was smaller than the mansion Robert and I had shared, but for the first time, it was entirely mine. Every detail, from the pale yellow kitchen walls to the cozy reading nook by the window, reflected my choices, my taste, my freedom. Leaving behind the house where Marcus and Victoria had plotted against me had felt like shedding an old skin. Here, in my little craftsman cottage on 3 peaceful acres outside the city, I could finally breathe. My mornings were different now, too. No more anxiety, no more walking on eggshells. Now, each sunrise came with excitement, a fresh start. Today, like every Tuesday for the past 3 months, I was volunteering at the senior center downtown, teaching watercolor painting to people who, like me, had discovered that being 64 meant you were just getting started. The irony wasn't lost on me. Victoria had once said I was too old to manage my own affairs. Yet here I was, managing a foundation, funding scholarships for seniors returning to college, and using Robert's legacy to enrich other people's lives. 12 people had already gone back to school through the scholarship program, 12 new beginnings, and counting. As I sipped my coffee and reviewed my class notes, the phone rang. For a moment, an old flicker of fear returned. Marcus? Victoria? But the caller ID said Dorothy. "Good morning, my favorite free woman," her cheerful voice said. Dorothy had been my oldest friend, and one of the few who'd seen through Victoria's manipulations from the start. I smiled. "Free and getting freer every day," I told her, settling into the window seat and watching the birds gather around the feeder. "I'm heading to the gallery this afternoon," I added, "to look at spaces for the art show." The art show had been Dorothy's idea. When she'd seen the stacks of watercolor paintings filling my spare room, she'd insisted, "These are beautiful, Helen. People should see them." At first, I'd hesitated. Showing my art felt vulnerable. But then I realized, vulnerability is just another form of freedom. The freedom to share parts of myself I'd kept hidden for years. "Any word from you-know-who?" Dorothy asked delicately. She never used Marcus's name anymore, as if it were a curse she refused to speak aloud. "Nothing," I said. "James told me they've moved to Phoenix. A fresh start, apparently." Through mutual friends, I'd heard Marcus was working for a construction company again, this time not as an owner, but an employee. And Victoria? She was a sales associate at a department store. The humbling they'd brought upon themselves was complete. "Good riddance," Dorothy said firmly. "You deserve peace." After our call, I finished my breakfast and headed to the senior center. What had begun as a volunteer project had become something much more, a second home, filled with laughter, paint-stained hands, and people who'd learned, like me, that it's never too late to begin again. As I set out the watercolor supplies, Margaret Stillwell, 78, widowed and radiant with excitement, hurried toward me. "Helen," she said breathlessly, "I have news. I showed my paintings to my granddaughter and she wants to hang them in her coffee shop. She says people will actually buy them." I smiled. 6 months ago, Margaret had insisted her creative days were over. Now she was talking about her first art sale. "That's wonderful, Margaret," I said. "You found your voice." "My voice," she repeated softly, as if testing the words. "Yes, I like that. For years, everyone else decided who I should be. My husband, my children, even my doctor. But these paintings? They're mine." As the class went on, I watched 12 seniors discover the joy of color. Joy in creating something new, something entirely their own. "Miss Helen," called Frank Morrison, a retired engineer. "This purple doesn't look right. What am I doing wrong?" I walked over to see his work, a watercolor of the park where he and his late wife used to walk. "You're not doing anything wrong, Frank," I said gently. "You're just learning which colors speak to you. Try adding a touch of blue." Frank smiled and nodded. 6 months ago, his family had tried to pressure him into moving to assisted living. Now he was painting, hiking, and even dating again. He'd told me last week, half laughing, half serious, "My kids don't understand why I won't move to Sunny Meadows." I'd smiled then, because I understood perfectly. Freedom isn't about escaping age, it's about rediscovering the life that still belongs to you. As I locked up the art room that evening, sunlight streamed through the windows, glinting off the wet paint. Robert had given me protection, yes, but more than that, he'd given me permission to live. Every brushstroke, every sunrise, every new friendship was proof that love doesn't end when life does. It continues, quietly, steadily, in every moment we choose to begin again. "They keep saying it would be easier for everyone," Frank had told me once, "but easier for who? Not for me." I'd encouraged him to stand firm, the same way Robert had taught me to protect his choices, his freedom, his life. After class, I drove downtown to meet Maria Santos, the owner of Sunrise Gallery, a vibrant woman in her 50s who specialized in showcasing artists over 60. "Society thinks creativity peaks when you're young," she'd said the first time we met. "But I've learned that the most powerful art comes from people who've lived long enough to understand what really matters." Today, we were finalizing plans for my first solo exhibition. The theme, Second Chances. A collection of paintings I'd created since Robert's passing, each one representing my journey from grief to independence to joy. Maria stopped in front of one canvas, a bird breaking free from a golden cage, wings outstretched against a sky bursting with color. "This will be your centerpiece," she said softly. "It radiates emotion." I studied it, remembering the day I'd painted it. I'd been thinking about Robert's letters, about how, even as he was dying, he'd fought to give me wings. The bird wasn't just escaping, it was celebrating its freedom. "I want to donate 20% of any sales to the senior center," I told her, "for their art program." Maria smiled. "Generous, but not surprising. I've heard about your scholarship fund." Word had spread about my projects, the scholarships, the volunteer work, the classes. It felt strange, being known for building instead of surviving, for giving instead of enduring. Victoria had been wrong about many things, but her biggest mistake had been believing that older people couldn't still make a difference. On the drive home, I took a detour past the house Robert and I once shared. A young family lived there now. Toys in the yard, bicycles on the porch, laughter echoing from the windows. The house looked happy again, alive in a way it hadn't been during those dark months. I felt no sadness, only gratitude. That home had sheltered our marriage, raised our son, and revealed the truth I needed to see. Now it belonged to a new story, just as I belonged to mine. Back at my cottage, I poured a glass of wine and sat on the back porch, watching the sunset behind the mountains. The sky burned orange and violet, and the air was cool and still. No phone calls, no manipulation, no guilt, just peace. My phone buzzed, a message from Sarah Chen. Saw the article about your upcoming art show. Robert would be so proud. I typed back, he gave me the freedom to discover who I really am. Her reply came almost instantly. You were always this person, Helen. You just needed someone to clear the path so you could shine. As darkness settled, I pulled out one of Robert's letters, not to mourn, but to remember. His words had become a source of strength, a reminder that love doesn't die. It transforms. It becomes guidance, courage, faith. You are worth protecting, worth cherishing, worth fighting for. I read the line aloud into the quiet evening air. It had proven true, more than I could ever have imagined. After 64 years of being told what I couldn't do, I finally knew who I was and what I could. Scene: The Late Bloomer. The art show was scheduled for next month. My name on the placard, my paintings on real gallery walls. At 64, I was about to have my first solo exhibition. Margaret, my student, had been right. Finding your voice changes everything. For too long, I'd let others speak for me. My parents when I was young, Robert when we were married, Marcus and Victoria when I was grieving. But Robert's final gift wasn't just money or security. It was space. The space to rediscover myself, to realize that my voice mattered. Tomorrow I'd teach another watercolor class, plan the exhibition, maybe even start writing that novel I'd been thinking about. Lunch with Dorothy, yoga at the community center, dinner with friends, Frank, Ruth, and the wonderful people who'd become my new family. At 64, I wasn't nearing the end. I was just getting started. The mountain air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and possibility. From my porch, I could see the distant twinkle of lights, homes filled with stories like mine, people finding their courage, their freedom, their second chances. I smiled, thinking of the title I'd chosen for the show, Late Bloomer, a celebration of second chances. Victoria had been wrong about almost everything, but especially this. I wasn't too old to start over. I was exactly the right age to begin. As I locked up my little cottage and turned off the lights, I knew this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of the one I was always meant to write. The story of a woman who learned that the most beautiful gardens often bloom in unexpected seasons, and that the bravest thing you can ever do is plant new seeds when everyone insists the growing season is over.